One of the most important ideas of the recent past is that developed by Anderson, who is now quite famous for his concept of imagined communities. All communities are actually imagined because they are not genetically derived. They're just things that people imagined. And he said that all communities are imagined communities, that there's no biological basis or genetic basis, for thinking of these communities as biologically derived. And the idea has really caught up, because when we say that we are an imagined community, it actually means that we can imagine ourselves as several communities, or belonging to several communities. For example, if you look at the Islamic intellectual background, we have different sects within this tradition. So some people call themselves Shafi, others call themselves Maliki, some call themselves Hanbali. So these are all, according to Anderson, these are just imagined communities, because there's no genetic basis. It's just that we choose to be Hanafi, or we choose to be Hanbali, or we choose to be Shafi. And we imagined ourselves as such. And there's no contradiction in this. And in fact, the so-called founders of these madhahib, never called themselves Shafi or Maliki or Hanbali. It was their students who constructed, the idea that we are following the tradition of our teachers. And these teachers are those who finally, became Shafi, Abu Hanifa, and Hanbali, and so on and so forth. But they themselves, never imagined to belong to any of these madhahib. To them, it was just a way of being. And interestingly, there were acrimonious differences between these groups. Like the Shafi were constantly being embattled by the followers of Abu Hanifa, and they thought that these people are in the wrong. It's as if they themselves had got wahi, but in fact, what they had was just a rigid position, regarding this. And then again, the same thing. You know, people who call themselves Shia. You know, these were the partisans of Sayyidina Ali. And Sayyidina Ali did not call himself a Shia. You know, that's just how things turned out. His followers became more fanatical, you know, in pursuing certain lines of thought. And then they came to associate it with him. But he himself was a very sane, balanced individual, you know. And of course, they gave him grand titles, you know, like Asadullah al-Ghalib, Imam al-Masharik wal-Magharib. You know, so for the Shia, Sayyidina Ali is almost everything. And the reason why they followed him was because he was one of the earliest converts to Islam. In fact, after Sayyida Khadija, Sayyidina Ali was the first male to convert to Islam. He had no doubts whatsoever about what the Prophet told him. You know, he was convinced right from the word go. You know, when Islam was mentioned to him. So. These are historical facts which we cannot deny. And then, of course, there are also other marginal groups. You know, some are actually quite extreme, and these were not the only ones. There have been several. And then, of course, later whittled down to only a handful. And these are what are known to us. But for those who have a historical sense, you know, they go back and try and understand and investigate the historical antecedents of the changes that were taking at that time. All changes in society are almost identical, you know, between one society and another. So, for example, if we look at the evolution of Christianity, we see the emergence of the two main, if you like, ideological groups. You know, the Protestants and the Catholics. There was a reason behind the emergence of Protestantism, and there was also a reason for the emergence of Catholicism. We associate the emergence of Protestantism through the thinking of Martin Luther, because Martin Luther believed that you know, you really didn't need to go through the priests in order to be absolved, you know, of your sins. You can go directly to God, and that, of course, challenged the dominance of the priestly class. and that almost came to define the Protestants all over the world. And of course there was resistance on the part of the Catholics. The Catholics felt that they needed to have a distinctive identity, and they maintained certain traditional practices, and then of course even within Catholicism there were subdivisions, like the earlier prescriptions of priests being celibate, the priests not marrying, others who came to be known as the Orthodox Catholics maintained that you can actually be a Catholic and still marry. So one has to be aware of these historical antecedents. And I suppose one could say more or less the same thing about the division of or the evolution of Hinduism, to Buddhism. So there's a difference between those who consider themselves as Hindus and those who consider themselves as Buddhists. So an awareness of this is essential. That change is almost inbuilt in human relationships. Whether we accept those changes or resist those changes depends on many factors. Depends on personalities, that are involved, and even further on, we can say, for example, American Catholicism is completely different from European Catholicism because of the tradition of self-assertion amongst Americans. It is not easy for them, to always accept everything that comes from the Vatican. Because to accept everything, without questioning from the Vatican, from the American perspectives, is actually to deny your Americanness. Americanness actually means thinking for yourself and making life or living life in such a way that it would be to your benefit rather than other people's benefits. So the examples are numerous, and you can look at them, from the religious angle. You can look at them at the political angle. You can look at them at economic angle, and so on and so forth. So these were all part of that tradition of imagined communities.